And then Athens fall. They engaged in a war that turned out to be much more costly and longer than anyone expected. So that should sound familiar. We are still in Iraq. To take that a little farther, we're still in Germany. Hitler died in the 40s, so we spend all kinds of money on military. And this drained the country of its resources. When you think about what is war, if you think of a bomb, you build a bomb and then you go shoot it at something, it blows up, and it's gone, right? There's nothing left of it, and over time that will obviously drain your savings. So they began to debase their currency by mixing copper into their gold coins, which would give you more coins. So obviously they take like a gold coin, just melt it down, you mix other metals into it, which would then give the illusion that there was more gold coins going around. But that was their version of a printing press, which we have today. We just obviously don't use gold and silver coins. So it's the first time in history that currency wasn't gold or silver, because they were mixing the copper in there. And as a result, their money became currency, as I already talked about, which is next to worthless. And then people holding gold noticed that their purchasing power increased drastically. Why? Once again, because real money holds its value. And then eventually Athens lost the war and never fully recovered to its past greatness. Rome. Everybody knows about Rome. A lot of similarities between the U.S. and Rome, in my opinion. But they learned nothing from the fall of Athens and debased their currency for hundreds of years. They clipped coins. Now, I find this very interesting. So if you go look at a coin today, they've got the little ribbed edges on the coin. That is actually because of Roman times. So what used to happen was you'd go to, say, the gladiator event or whatever, and when you're walking in, a government official would take a knife or whatever and would literally clip part of your coin. They would then take that, melt it down, and they'd make more coins. So once again, they were just increasing the supply, and the coins you had would get smaller and smaller, which is another way to devalue your currency. So that's where you get the ribbed portion of the coins today. So it's that that your coin hasn't been clipped and melted down and devalued. But like I said, we have a printing press today, so it's almost irrelevant. Much like Athens, they also mixed other metals. By the end, their gold coins were almost completely copper or bronze, just because they'd melted all the gold and silver out of them. So when prices got out of control, governments imposed price caps and froze wages, just like they did in the Great Depression. And what that means, the reasons price got out of control, when you start to clip coins and you're making more of them, then people can bid up prices of things. So if I was to give you, you're going to go to an auction, and I just all of a sudden out of the blue gave you $1 million, whatever you were going to go buy, for sure you would bid up the price of it. And that's no different than debasing your coins or a money printing press today. So once they imposed price caps and froze wages, businesses closed their doors as they couldn't sell things for a profit. So as prices went up, the government at the time said, hey, you Mr. Businessman selling corn or whatever they were selling, wheat, they said you can't sell your corn for more than $1 a bushel or whatever it was at the time. And if a businessman can't make money, that's the whole reason you go into business, you're just going to shut the doors. And that's really what caused the collapse of Rome. And it's the same thing happened in Great Depression. They were imposing price caps on things. So what they also did was they enacted a guns and butter policy, public works projects, and soldiers. And we have a standing army in over 150 countries today. As I already mentioned, we're still in Germany, we're in Italy, we're all over the Middle East. We're just everywhere. So once again, much like Rome, we've run out of money, and we are spending money we don't have to keep soldiers in 150 different countries around the world. It's asinine, but it is what it is. So this led to the first recorded hyperinflation. During all this time, gold rose in price by a multiple of 42,000. This next line here, the $35 times the 42,000 from over here, gives you 1.5 million. This 35 is actually from right around the Great Depression time. The government asked that its citizens, the U.S. citizens, turn in their gold, and they would give you $35. So even today, that's basically what the government considers the price of gold to be. So 35 times that 42,000 would, if you were to turn it in today, you would get about $1.5 million. And that 1.5 million is assuming that assuming that we follow in Rome's footsteps and have that type of gold multiple rise. The one thing with gold, though, it's not a company. Its sole role in finance is it's basically an inflationary hedge. A lot of people tell you you're wearing your tinfoil hat if you own gold, which is ridiculous. But all it's doing is telling you that something's wrong, there's way too much money being created, and gold just follows in its footsteps, as I will portray later on in this. I'll show you some charts and kind of show you the ridiculousness of how many dollars, etc., we're printing. So will 42,000 happen? I have no idea. It's impossible to predict what politicians will do today, but this is just giving you a gauge. I actually believe this. To me, France in the John Law period is more closely related to the U.S. than anything else in history. That's, of course, my opinion, but we'll go through it and I'll show you why, hopefully. So France was deeply in debt when John Law came to power. Much like the U.S., we are deeply in debt. We are the largest debtor nation in the history of mankind. Anyway, so he was friends with the Duke, and he was given a bank and was allowed to issue currency. The reading of John Law actually is pretty interesting. The guy was like a gambling nut, and he just befriended this Duke, and the Duke was like, oh, this guy's good with money, so I'm going to give him a bank. Anyway, the slight increase in currency gave the people an illusion of wealth. So what John Law decided to do was to print money. He started his first, basically in France, their first form of currency, and he just started giving people paper money, which then they could go buy things with. And the reason that's an illusion, once again, is currency isn't backed by anything, so it really has no value. The only value it has is that people believe it has value. And so what happened with all that money? As people were just given money, they're going to go do something with it, right? And they did. So they invested their money in shares of the Mississippi Company. Excuse me. And the Mississippi Company at the time was seen as an amazing thing. They were over in the U.S. mining all kinds of different stuff. And the population in France, much like the tech bubble, thought it was brilliant, as I already said, and they just kept buying and buying and buying, and the valuations got ridiculous. It was completely overbought. And then eventually it collapsed, much like the tech bubble did in the U.S. And what happened during that time, while people believed they were making money, it was all paper gains. They started to invest it into real estate. So houses were being built everywhere, and the prices of housing started to go up, which then immediately started another bubble, which should be fairly fresh in people's minds here, as that happened quite recently with the housing bubble. And obviously this one popped as well. So when the housing bubble popped in France, people said, hey, we were given all this paper currency, you can't do anything with it. And we're going to go turn it into the bank and get our gold and silver back. And as I mentioned earlier, so bankers, it happens all the time because it's just kind of naturally ingrained in us, I guess, for most humans to be somewhat greedy. They had given out more paper than they had gold in their banks. So when people started bringing all this currency back, all the paper money back into the banks didn't have enough gold to hand out. So then there was a run on the banks, and the banks had to shut down. So then they were having a huge banking crisis, which, in the U.S. is basically the same thing with the housing bubble. And then our stock market got rocked, and you had all these banks being bailed out, and yada, yada, yada. So then the monarchy made holding gold illegal. The reason being because they're like, hey, we can't have everyone coming and get their gold, even though it's theirs in the first place, because it's causing a bank run. And the government at the time, thankfully our government doesn't do this, but they began to imprison and kill its people. So they were actually just guillotining people left and right. And obviously, people then started to smuggle gold out of the country. They were trying to leave France, and the smart money, or people who saw it coming in advance, had already left the country. So then you have all this brain drain going on, where all the intelligent people of the country leave and go to other places in the world. And eventually, as it led to a depression, this all happened in a time span of about 4 years, which is amazing. But ours isn't that far off, right? So you had tech bubble early 2000, you got the housing bubble in 2008. And now we have what I consider a government bubble or an inflationary collapse that's kind of en route. This also then led to the rise of Napoleon. The following video is about France and the rise of Napoleon. It's put together by James Turk and Max Kaiser. I find this stuff absolutely fascinating, so hopefully you'll stick around and watch it.